renovation. So now I would actually like to introduce our first speakers all the way from New Westminster, BC. We have Claudia Frere, and she is a housing and social planner, and we have Kim Dayton, who is the manager with licensing and integrated services. They're going to speak about the anti-renoviction policy New Westminster passed in 2019. Go ahead, ladies.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us and for inviting us to share about the work that has been underway in New West over the past year or two. I'm joining today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And so I'm going to start. I'll start with, I'm going to provide a little bit of background about how this work emerged, the policy context, the process to develop the renovictions regulations, and then I'm going to turn it over to my superstar colleague, Kim, who's going to speak about implementation, the current status of renovictions in New West, and some of the lessons learned that we've been reflecting on. So just a little bit about New Westminster. New West has a large aging stock of over 9,000 purpose-built rental units in 300 plus buildings, and this represents about 60% of our rental supply. These units feature lower rents than new secured market rental because of their age and because of the control of rent increases through the Residential Tenancy Act. In 2016, New West began to see the beginning of a wave of renovictions. And in response, at that time, staff developed a renovictions action plan to inform tenants of their rights and facilitate enhanced access to information and resources. We did things like we held information sessions for tenants with various staff and with the Tenants Resource Advisory Center, and had developed quite a robust web page with lots of resources. Around the same time, Council also endorsed 2 resolutions to the Union of BC Municipalities, urging the provincial government to amend the Residential Tenancy Act to deter renovictions. And then by 2019, renovictions had really escalated, and there was evidence of upwards of 300 renovictions in at least 15 buildings in New West, and that's what we knew of. We assumed that there was likely more. And, you know, while New West is a small but diverse urban city, it really does face many of the same challenges of larger cities. And like everywhere, you know, urban affordable housing is certainly one of our most significant challenges across the country. So the City of New Westminster really is seen as having taken a leadership role by creating both a tactical plan and developing policies and regulations that really focus directly on safe, secure, and affordable housing. And in January 2019, New Westminster City Council endorsed a rental housing revitalization initiative to address the need for affordable rental housing, the risk of renovictions, and the maintenance of purpose-built rental buildings. This initiative has 2 parts. The first part was the draft rental replacement policy, which is still actually underway and has not yet been completed. And the second component of this program is the rental housing revitalization program. And this latter program includes two parts. One is the business licensing restrictions against renovictions, which we're talking to you about tonight. And this is really considered the stick of the program. And then it also includes a proposed rental housing incentives program to support renewal and maintenance of purpose-built rental buildings. And that's considered the carrots part of the program. And again, that work is actually still also underway. It was paused with COVID, and we're just picking that up again. But the City of New West, as you know, was the first municipality in BC to tackle the issue of renovictions using municipal regulations. And really it emerged with a convergence of city staff from several departments, specifically planning, licensing, and integrated services and building. And we began to collaborate on possible actions that were within the city's authority to respond to the crisis. So we also, as part of the process, it involved a robust consultation program with stakeholders on the various components of the rental housing revitalization initiative. which include the amendments to the Business Regulations and Licensing Rental Units bylaw, which is what deters the renovictions. And the consultation program was conducted in February and March of 2019. Stakeholders included tenants, housing advocates such as the New Westminster Tenants Union, ACORN Canada, rental property owners, Landlord BC, nonprofit housing providers, third-party occupancy management entities, the development community, and the Provincial Housing Authority, BC Housing. So it also included an online survey, a public open house, 2 stakeholder workshops, and also review and feedback from 2 city committees, the Community and Social Issues Advisory Committee and the Advisory Planning Commission. So again, the outcome was an amendment to an existing bylaw, the Business Regulations and Licensing Rental Units bylaw, to add new regulations specifically pertaining to building renovations. And the intent of this amendment is really to deter owners of purpose-built rental buildings from evicting tenants for renovations. So it offers protection to tenants by requiring landlords to offer temporary accommodation to those tenants displaced by significant renovations, and then the right of first refusal to occupy the same unit at the same rent. And so following adoption, we also engaged in a quite widespread public awareness campaign that was delivered to both landlords, tenants, and we've really seen the number of renovictions decrease very dramatically. I'm going to turn it over to Kim now, who will talk more about the implementation and the lessons learned. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Claudia. So yeah, as Claudia said earlier, this is not a standalone bylaw. It was an amendment to an existing bylaw. We had a bylaw in place, or have a bylaw in place that already regulates rental properties. It has a standard of maintenance section, it has a use abatement section, and now it has a renoviction section. So it was an amendment to an existing bylaw. We made a policy decision, so it's not in the bylaw, that we would focus on rental buildings that were over six units or more. And that was where the problems were occurring. And so that's where we put our emphasis and what we focused on. We did also amend 2 other bylaws, and they are ticketing bylaws. So we have 2 ticketing programs in New Westminster. One, the maximum ticket is $500, and the other one, the maximum is $1,000. So we had to amend both of those ticketing bylaws to enable us to ticket if we did have to take enforcement action. So we have 5 ticketable offenses that, again, we can ticket either 500 or 1,000. And the ticketable offenses are evicting without proper permits, eviction without relocating the tenant, eviction or failure to provide relocation agreements or relocation documentation, and then an excessive rent increase. So those are the 5 offenses. Now, those offenses are daily offenses. So that whole idea of it's the cost of doing business, so we'll just pay the fines and continue to be non-compliant. Hopefully the fact that these are daily offenses, and it could be $1,000 a day, will be a disincentive to have that attitude of cost of doing business. Prior to rolling out the bylaw, we did engage in a really robust education campaign with both the owners that would be affected and also with the tenants that could be affected or were being affected. So in addition to the open house and the stakeholder workshops that Claudia mentioned earlier, we also developed a brochure. And this is in recognition of that it is a complex issue, and it is it's just complicated. It's not an easy thing for people to grasp right away. So we made a very highly visual, simple brochure titled Tenants in New West, and it's a 2-page trifold brochure that gives essential information about the regulations so that tenants could recognize whether or not they were at risk for an eviction. And those brochures we made available at City Hall, put it on the website, but we also inserted it in all of the utility bills that went out from the city. Another part of the education component were in-person meetings with either affected landlords or potentially landlords would be potentially affected. So we looked at all landlords of residential buildings that either had an active building permit or building permit application that was in process. And it worked out, it was about 20. Again, these are representing buildings that usually have anywhere from 16 to 40 units. And we invited them to come to a meeting with the chief building inspector and myself. I'm the chief license inspector. And we met with them individually, basically one-on-one, and we advised them of the situation, why the city was taking this approach, what had transpired, what their responsibilities were, and what they could expect if they were non-compliant. So that was very successful as well. We did hear some concerns from landlords, very legitimate concerns about how can I possibly maintain this building. It's old, it's 50, 60 years old, and it needs an overhaul. Everything's going wrong, every day of the week, and yet I'm only allowed to increase the rent by 2% a year. And that's not sustainable financially. So we heard that, and that kind of speaks back to what Claudia was saying earlier, that there have to also be carrots that come with the stick to give them the incentive to do the maintenance that's needed. There is a provision in the bylaw for property owners to appeal or apply to council for an exemption. So if they somehow feel that this should not apply to them because the renovations are so extensive, they can provide documentation from certified professionals that support that. And then council would look at that and make a determination. To date, we have not had any applications for exemptions, so that mechanism is untested. And then also I meant to tell you, we haven't had any tickets either. So we haven't issued any tickets. So that also is untested at this time. Prior to implementation and during and just after, we did receive a lot of calls from tenants. We designated one bylaw officer to be the point person. And that point person, we renamed the position to Tenant Support Coordinator to more accurately reflect the work that they were doing at that time. They were essentially a bylaw officer, but we called it Tenant Support Coordinator, and all the calls would go to that individual. It's really important that that individual have a certain skill set. Because first they have to be very knowledgeable about the bylaw, but also knowledgeable about the provincial regulations and how they overlap or come up against each other, so they can make that determination when they're giving referrals and advice. They have to have really good rapport with the service agencies like ACORN and the tenants union, because we are recommending people get support on an ongoing basis from those organizations. But more importantly than anything, they have to be compassionate, because the calls that are coming in, these people are extremely upset and anxious, and rightly so. And so these are not 5 or 10 minute calls. These are 30 and 40-minute calls with folks that are very emotionally upset. And so it's really important that the right skill set and the right, the point person have that compassion and the ability to listen and understand what exactly this means to people. Whenever we would receive information about a possible renoviction, then a determination would be made based on the evidence given. Is this a rumor that's going around the building, or is this actually in play and in progress? And then depending on that situation, that would trigger which type of letter we would send. So if it was suspicious, it hadn't happened yet, and we heard that from one tenant, we would send the entire building what we call a soft tenant letter saying, hey, by the way, as a tenant, here's what you need to know. We'd also send a soft letter to the landlord saying, hey, here's something you need to know as a landowner of a residential property. If, however, we heard that they were actually renovicting and it appeared that that was happening, then we would send the firmer letter saying, we have reason to believe that you are in violation of, and here's the lay of the land. So depending on the situation, that would trigger which letter we would send, and then we would send the entire building that letter. From 2017 January to now, so about 4.5 years, we had 39 files, and 31 of those were prior to enactment of this bylaw amendment. So 31 of the 39 and 8 following. So our city records indicate there has been a significant drop in renovictions and calls about renoviction. The lessons we learned. So we learned that you cannot block or prevent buyouts. So a lot of the landlords are offering financial buyouts for people to leave. The highest I heard was 15,000, but they can range from 2, 5, 10, all the way to 15. And they are very attractive to folks on a fixed income that may have been out of circulation and not realize what rents are. And they that money can serve a lot of purposes. And we had some very sad stories of people who accepted, signed on the dotted line, went out and tried to find another unit and couldn't, and then regretted it and wanted to return the money. And of course, that wasn't possible. They'd already signed the contract. It's awful when people can't make an informed choice and don't know. And those stories are heartbreaking. We also heard, however, folks who were quite happy with the buyout. Maybe they were planning on moving in with their girlfriend or boyfriend, or planning to move to the Okanagan, and it was perfect timing. So it's important for staff to try not to decide what's best for each individual tenant, because the situations are unique. We also learned that the idea of comparable might be a little bit difficult. Is a 1-bedroom on the 3rd story in an old building with a great view the same as a 1-bedroom on the ground floor with a view of the garden that's in a newer building? But we haven't had to get into that yet. We have decided, we did this with kind of a policy decision, that if there is no complaint, then we're not going to pursue enforcement. So this came up with an individual who took temporary accommodation in another building that the owner owned, came back a year later to her newly renovated unit that she had before. She was paying $800 prior to the renovations, and she agreed in arbitration at the provincial residential tenancy branch to pay $12. That would be a bylaw violation. That is an excessive rent increase, $800 to $1,200. However, she agreed to that. There is no complainant. We chose not to enforce. So that's kind of an unusual situation. These things are so unique. You don't really know how it's going to play out. And so we learned over time. The last thing we learned is that you cannot prevent bullying behavior. So, we have a building right now where there were 40 units, 7 folks stayed on, the other 33 left. And so it's a shell of a building with only 7 tenants in it, and the renovations are occurring around them. And the landlord, I think, is being particularly discourteous and disrespectful. So not letting them know when the power is going out. It's going out for 3 or 4 hours. They don't know in advance, or the water's being turned off for 3 or 4 hours. They're not told in advance. Perhaps not cleaning up the dust and debris from the construction as quickly as normally. Nothing that we can ever enforce on, but just disrespectful behavior. And we think it's based on the fact that that this whole renoviction fight occurred. So so that's some of the lessons that we learned, and we're still learning.
Yeah, I definitely think it's always going to be kind of a learning as you go type of thing. So I was just informed actually that Councillor McAvoy, Jamie McAvoy, that's his name, right? He is here. I wondered if you wanted to say a few words, Jamie. Someone might need to unmute him.
Mute, eh? New Westminster has about 43% of our population are renters. It's one of the highest in the Metro Vancouver area, and it's often said that renters don't vote in large numbers. That isn't true anymore in New Westminster, because when people see their civic government active on issues and see a reason to vote and participate in civic government, then people do. And in fact, one of our councillors right now is a renter. And you see that one of the effects in attempting to implement renoviction bylaws, you just heard from our city staff, and having city staff who understand, who have the commitment, who get it in terms of what people are going through in their day-to-day lives, that's really huge. When New Westminster sort of first embarked on a journey of addressing homelessness and housing issues more, there was a change. There had to be not only political change, there had to be cultural change at City Hall too. And that you see what happens when you have housing staff and you have bylaws staff who understand the issues and are working proactively. I get emails. I used to get emails even just a couple of years ago. Most of my emails from renters were desperate situations where people were being evicted for a renovation. Now most of my emails from renters are thank yous, or they're grateful for the support that they got from the city. So it's really a transformative change. And you know, the point to make is that this is something that hugely affects people's lives. If you have, I'm not sure how many renovictions we had. I can't remember the number before we introduced the renoviction bylaws, but we were getting up to a point where within a few years, if you looked at the demographics, some 250 people had been renovicted in the city. That's huge. At the same time, we're trying to fight homelessness, but we have people losing homes where there's no replacement in the same kind of price range that there was before. And we had resistance, you know, but public support was really on our side, to be honest. I mean, certainly in Toronto and Hamilton, just like New Westminster, Vancouver, people get it. When I first started as a city councillor, housing was kind of a small caucus of people that met at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and a small caucus that discussed housing. Now it's really mainstream. But that first step is often the most difficult one to take. There are still cities across Canada where senior staff will tell their councils that it can't be done. There's no way it can be done. But we got frustrated with that, and we tried to say, okay, let's really think about that. We have limited powers as a city, like all cities do in Canada. But let's really think about this. Do we have any power that can become relevant to some of these issues? And it turned out that we realized we have the right to license businesses. We have the right to regulate businesses, and that the renting of homes is mostly a business, right? I'm sure there are neighborhoods there where the entire way that housing operates has changed from, you know, the person who sort of made their post-war investment and actually lives in the apartment building with their tenants. That barely exists now in New Westminster. We have corporate owners who've owned 12, 20 different apartment buildings. So renting homes really is a business, just quite logically. It should be treated as a business. It should be licensed as a business. It should be regulated as a business. And when we do that, we're only applying the same kind of conditions and practices that we normally use to license a business to ensure that our city is functioning well. So I'm really glad that you're looking at this. I'm really glad that you're taking it on. As a former renter, I even feel personally grateful that people are doing this work and trying to advance this cause. In New Westminster, the work that ACORN did in sort of laying the groundwork, talking to people, helping to educate politicos to understand what renters are going through, because, you know, a lot of political representatives still think renting is what they did when they went to university before they got that first mortgage and bought a house for $50,000. So that educational work, that work on the ground, that knocking on doors, that educating people, it was just tremendous. And I couldn't have had success in trying to tackle renovictions without those changes at City Hall, where staff were also really being creative and thoughtful and coming up with ways to do these things, and the work on the ground by activists. And we need that as politicians. We need that backup so it doesn't look like it's just some pet project, right? So thank you very much for that, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you, Councillor McAvoy, and also thank you to Claudia and Kim for coming here and speaking for us. So at this time, I actually would like to pass it back to Abdullah.
Thanks, Dana, and thank you to our friends from New Westminster. That's